They told me family was everything, that blood would never betray me. I believed it, until the night my sister-in-law shoved a tray of champagne into my hands at a party inside my own mansion. Guests laughed as she sneered, "At least you have something to do, waitress." My chest burned with shame, but I stayed silent. Then her boss walked in, froze, and whispered words that silenced the entire room. "Wait, isn't she our CEO?" In that moment, I knew the game had changed, and for the first time, I was ready to play. The phone rang at 2 a.m., its shrill tone slicing through the silence of my bedroom. My heart leapt, half in fear, half in dread, because I already knew who it was. I didn't even need to look at the screen. I pressed the green button and heard my mother's voice, shaky and insistent. "Emily, I can't sleep. The doctor says I need more tests, and they cost money. You don't want me to suffer, do you?" Her words tumbled out with a mix of weakness and demand, the same tone she'd used my entire life whenever she wanted something. I rubbed my eyes, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. "Mom, it's 2 a.m, I whispered, my voice cracking. But she didn't stop. She reminded me of her sacrifices, the nights she stayed up for me, the meals she gave up so I could study. I had heard this story 100 times. Each retelling chipped away at my resolve until guilt pressed heavier than sleep ever could. "Of course, Mom, I'll handle it," I murmured, already reaching for my laptop to transfer money. As the numbers blinked across the screen, I saw my balance drop lower and lower, yet her voice on the line grew lighter, almost cheerful. "That's my good girl," she said before hanging up, leaving me in silence. I sat there long after the call ended, the glow of the screen painting my face pale blue. Tears gathered at the corners of my eyes. People at work saw me as a strong woman, a leader who never faltered. But here, alone at night, I felt like a child chained to invisible obligations. Family first, they always said. But what they meant was Emily first, to sacrifice. I curled up on the edge of my bed, hugging my knees. For years, I convinced myself that this was love, that the constant demands, the guilt trips, the midnight calls were proof I mattered. But that night, something in me shifted. I felt the weight of those chains, cold and heavy, wrapped tight around my chest. I glanced back at the bank account window, the balance dangerously low, and a thought struck me, sharp and undeniable. This was only the beginning. The next day, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, yet I still went to the office with a polished smile. That's the role I played, CEO by day, obedient daughter by night, but cracks had started to form in the mask. During lunch, a notification buzzed on my phone. A group chat, not just any chat, one I wasn't supposed to see. My sister-in-law had accidentally added me before removing me seconds later, but it was long enough. I caught a glimpse of their words, jokes about my clothes, whispers about how I was desperate for attention, even laughter at the idea that I would end up alone forever. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the screenshots I managed to capture. They called me the wallet, mocking how easy it was to get money out of me. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but instead I locked the screen and sat in silence. The betrayal burned deeper than the words themselves. These weren't strangers. They were supposed to be my family. Later that week, my brother called. His voice cracked as he spoke of sudden chest pains, expensive treatments, urgent bills. I rushed to send the money, my mind fogged by panic. Hours later, I learned the truth. He had been spotted at a bar, laughing with friends, perfectly healthy. My chest ached, but I said nothing. I swallowed the betrayal like poison, telling myself maybe he just needed help. Maybe this time it would be different. But the final blow came quietly, wrapped in the disguise of kindness. My mother and father showed up one weekend with smiles, hugs, and endless praise. They told me how proud they were, how grateful for all I'd done. For a few blissful hours, I let myself believe it. I cooked for them, laughed with them, and felt the warmth of belonging. But when I left the room to get dessert, I overheard them whispering. "She won't say no," my father chuckled. "Emily's always desperate to please." The laughter felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. I froze in the hallway, dessert tray in hand, my heart pounding. Love bombing, that's what it was. Showering me with affection just to soften me before the next demand. That night, unable to sleep, I went through my emails, and there it was, the twist that made my blood run cold. A message from a former college friend, confused and concerned. "Emily, did you really need to borrow money last month? Your sister-in-law reached out, said it was urgent. I sent her the amount you asked for." My hand shook as I read it again and again. She had used my name to borrow money from people I knew, dragging my reputation into her schemes. I pressed my palms against my face, trying to steady my breath. Betrayal didn't even begin to cover it. It wasn't just that they mocked me or used me. It was that they stole pieces of me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left untouched. I opened my bank account again. The numbers were lower than I ever imagined. I stared at the emptiness on the screen, my reflection faintly mirrored in the glass. My chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. "If they can betray me in silence," I whispered into the stillness, "what else are they hiding?" The chandeliers glittered like 1,000 watchful eyes above the grand hall. Laughter rippled through the crowd, crystal glasses clinking in celebration. I stood at the edge of it all, the polished marble beneath my heels colder than ice. This was my house, every brick, every polished corner bought with my labor. Yet tonight, I was not the hostess, I was the help. "Emily," my sister-in-law hissed, pressing a silver tray of champagne flutes into my hands, her lips curled in a smile sharp enough to cut. "At least you have something to do. Make yourself useful, waitress." Her words carried across the room, loud enough for the circle of relatives nearby to hear. They laughed, my parents, my brother, even distant cousins who once begged me for loans. Their amusement echoed in the hall, bouncing off the walls of my mansion like an insult branded into stone. My cheeks burned, but I didn't lower my gaze. I moved between the guests, offering glasses as though the tray weren't trembling in my hands. Every smirk, every mocking glance, fueled the cold fire building in my chest. I had lived in silence for years, but in that silence, I had also learned to watch, to plan, to wait. As I circled back toward the center of the room, a shift swept through the crowd. The laughter faltered as a new voice carried over the music. "Wait, what is she doing?" A man's tone, surprised and confused. Heads turned as the tall figure stepped into the light. My sister-in-law's boss. His eyes locked on me, widening in disbelief. "Isn't she our CEO?" The tray wobbled in my hands as whispers rippled through the room. My sister-in-law's face drained of color, her smirk collapsing into horror. Her fingers clutched the stem of her glass too tightly. Then, in a silence so sharp it cut the air, the glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound rang like a gunshot. No one moved, no one spoke. The fragments glittered at her feet, tiny daggers catching the light. My father's jaw fell slack. My mother's hand flew to her chest, and my brother's laugh froze mid-breath. Their expressions were a portrait of disbelief, as if they were seeing me for the first time. The boss stepped closer, his voice firm but tinged with awe. "Emily Carter, what are you doing holding a tray?" I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to feel it, the weight of the moment, the collapse of the lies they had wrapped themselves in. Then I set the tray down on a table with deliberate calm. My hands no longer shook. I lifted my chin, eyes scanning each familiar face, from the mother who had drained me dry to the sister-in-law who had humiliated me in my own home. "This is your house?" the boss asked, his brows knitting. The twist hung heavy in the air as I answered, my voice steady. "Yes, this mansion is mine. Every wall, every lamp, every glass you're holding. And if you step outside, the cars in the driveway, they're mine too." Gasps rippled through the hall. My sister-in-law stumbled back, her heels clicking against the marble as she searched for words. You can't be serious." But her voice betrayed her. Everyone could hear the tremor. I glanced at my parents, their faces pale as parchment. My father's lips moved as though he wanted to speak, but no sound came. My mother looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath her. And in that silence, my mind pulled me back. I was 12 again, standing in the school auditorium, holding up a certificate I'd earned. I had searched for their faces in the crowd, desperate for pride in their eyes, but all I'd found was indifference. Later that night, my father had muttered, "It's not like awards put food on the table." I remembered my teenage years working part-time jobs to help pay bills while my friends studied, only to be told by my mother, "Don't get too proud, Emily. Remember who you owe everything to." Those memories coiled around me like smoke, tightening my throat. My voice shook as I finally spoke aloud, not just to them, but to every guest leaning in, listening. "I'm done being your shadow. I'm done living beneath your scorn." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the music still playing in the background. My words settled heavy in the air, pressing on everyone who had laughed minutes ago. My sister-in-law forced a laugh, brittle and sharp, her hands flailing as though she could brush away the truth. "She's exaggerating, you know how she is, always pretending, always trying to look important." Her smile was painted on, but the terror in her eyes betrayed her. Guests exchanged glances. Some looked at me with a newfound curiosity, others at her with disgust. The mask she wore was crumbling, and I knew in that instant the balance had shifted. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to humiliate her. All I needed was silence, and in that silence, they could hear her fear louder than any words. And as I watched her stumble, her cheeks flushing with panic, one thought settled into me like a stone in calm water. This was only the beginning. After that night at the mansion, I knew silence would no longer be my shield. It had kept me hidden for years, but now it would become my weapon. For months, while they laughed at me, I was listening. While they thought I was weak, I was recording. Every tear I shed in the dark was a thread woven into a net I would soon pull tight. The first file I pulled from the drawer of my desk was an audio recording, my mother's voice at 2 a.m, brittle and manipulative. "Emily, if you really love me, you'll send the money. Don't you want me to live to see your success? In the background, I remembered the sound of television laughter played faintly, proof she wasn't sick in bed, but wide awake and comfortable. Then came the emails. My brother's digital fingerprints were all over financial transactions he thought I'd never see. I had traced transfers from my accounts into his, disguised as medical payments. Cross-checking dates, I discovered on the same day he claimed to be in the hospital, he had booked flights for a vacation. Every click of my mouse had been a blade carving truth from their lies. And then there was my sister-in-law. She thought her arrogance would hide her crimes, that mocking me in front of others would keep me blind. But while she jeered, I collected. Expense reports didn't match company records. Receipts were altered. I even had a video of her signing under a false name during a business meeting, unaware the camera behind her was mine. For months, she believed I was naive, a woman too soft, too sentimental to notice. What she didn't know was that I let her think that way. I wore innocence like a mask, a perfect disguise. The more she underestimated me, the deeper she sank into the trap. I placed all the evidence into a small black USB drive. As I turned it between my fingers, its weight felt heavier than metal. It carried nights of sleeplessness, years of humiliation, a lifetime of betrayal, all condensed into files and folders. I whispered into the quiet of my study, and on this drive lies the one thing that can destroy them all. But even I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. Battles weren't won by proof. They were won by strategy, by allies. And so I built my army. The first was my lawyer, sharp-eyed and relentless. She had guided me through contracts no one else bothered to read, ensuring my ownership of the mansion and my stake in the company were airtight. Then came my financial advisor, who had helped me trace every dollar, every debt, until the truth formed a map of betrayal. I reached further. A security expert helped me set up encrypted backups of every file. A therapist taught me how to control my voice, how to speak without letting anger crack through. One by one, they formed a circle around me. People whose loyalty was not purchased by blood, but earned by trust. And yet, amid the strength I gathered, I still carried wounds. One evening, after hours of sifting through files, I met with the only friend I had kept from my younger years, Maya. We sat in the quiet corner of a cafe, the smell of coffee thick between us. I told her everything, the calls, the lies, the humiliations. My voice shook, and to my own surprise, tears spilled down my cheeks. They were supposed to be my family, I whispered, clutching my cup with trembling hands. I gave them everything, and they turned me into a stranger in my own life. Maya reached across the table, her hand steady on mine. They turned you into their victim, Emily, but you are not staying one. You're stronger than they ever imagined. For the first time in years, I let myself lean on someone. It wasn't weakness, it was breath, the kind I hadn't taken in far too long. And then came the final twist, the one that sealed my resolve. The boss of my sister-in-law, the same man who had recognized me at the party, asked to meet privately. I expected questions, perhaps even suspicion, but instead, he leaned across the polished wood of his office desk and said, "Emily, I've known who you were all along. I've watched how she treated you, and I've watched you rise. Quietly, I've kept records too. I'm on your side." The weight of his words sank into me. For years, I thought I had fought alone, but now I saw the truth. Even in shadows, I had allies I didn't know existed. That night, as I locked the USB in my safe, my reflection caught in the steel door. My eyes no longer looked tired. They burned sharp and alive. I whispered into the silence, words I had never dared to say before. Tomorrow, the mask comes off. The second party in my mansion was supposed to be like any other. Wine, laughter, and carefully rehearsed facades. They expected me to hover on the sidelines, invisible and compliant. Instead, I walked into the center of the room with calm steps, my heels tapping against the marble like a countdown. Every conversation stilled as I raised a small black USB drive between my fingers. "You all think you know me," I began, my voice low but carrying. "You think I am the weak one, the wallet, the shadow. Tonight, you see who I really am." A projector flickered to life against the white wall. The first recording played, my mother's voice, sharp and manipulative, begging for money at 2 a.m. Guests shifted uncomfortably as her words echoed. "If you love me, you'll send it. Don't you want me to live long enough to see your success?" Then came the screenshots of financial transfers, each one showing my brother siphoning money under the guise of medical bills. Laughter at the party vanished, replaced by murmurs of disbelief. My brother's face drained of color, his eyes darting desperately around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally, I revealed the receipts, doctored numbers, altered records, signatures that belonged not to me, but to my sister-in-law. Her smirk collapsed as the evidence scrolled across the wall, undeniable and damning. The room, once filled with laughter at my expense, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. I could feel it, the shift from mockery to awe. And then the unexpected twist. Someone in the crowd was live streaming. I hadn't planned it, hadn't needed to, but as I glanced around, I saw phones lifted discreetly, red recording lights blinking. Within minutes, the truth wasn't confined to these walls. It was spilling across social media, a wildfire of humiliation for them and vindication for me. Guests who had once looked at me with disdain now whispered with excitement, their eyes wide. In their stares, I wasn't the family's servant anymore. I was their queen. My sister-in-law's voice shattered the silence. "She forged everything," she screamed, her face red with panic. Her accusation ricocheted through the room, desperate, wild. She pointed at me, her hands trembling. "None of this is real," gasps broke out. But I didn't flinch. I folded my arms, letting the accusation hang in the air like smoke. My father stepped forward, his voice booming with false authority. "This is lies. She's twisting everything. You all know Emily. She's dramatic, unstable." My mother nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face on command. "She wants to destroy us. After everything we did for her, she wants revenge." The smear campaign began in real time. Gaslighting, denial, character assassination. It was their favorite script. But this time, I wasn't the same Emily who bowed her head and apologized. I opened a folder on the projector. Legal documents, notarized contracts, official records. The lawyer I'd hired months ago had ensured every piece was watertight. The signatures matched theirs. The dates aligned perfectly. Their lies unraveled under the weight of proof they couldn't touch. The room erupted into chaos. Some guests shouted, others filmed, while a few slipped away to avoid the fallout. My brother's voice cracked as he shouted over the crowd, "She's setting us up. She's not family anymore." And then silence. My parents, faces pale and trembling, dropped the act. They approached me slowly, desperation in their eyes. My mother reached for my hand. "Emily, please, we're still your family. Don't do this to us. We only wanted the best for you." For a moment, something in me wavered. Memories of childhood scraped against my resolve. Her tucking me into bed, my father teaching me to ride a bike, the rare nights of warmth. My throat tightened, but then I remembered the laughter, the humiliation, the years they drained me dry. I pulled my hand back. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't break you down. Family doesn't sell your name for their gain. Her tears fell harder, but I didn't bend. For the first time, I felt the chains fall away, one link at a time. I turned back to the crowd, my voice clear and unshaken. "You thought I was your pawn," I said, my eyes sweeping over each face that had once mocked me. My sister-in-law stumbled backward, shaking her head, denial pouring from her lips. My brother froze, his fists clenched. My father glared, but the power had already drained from his stance. I let the silence grow sharp, each second cutting deeper than any words could. And then I finished, my voice cold, resolute, final. "I'm the queen." The fallout came faster than even I imagined. By the next morning, the video from the party had gone viral. Millions of strangers watched the so-called poor waitress transform into the CEO and owner of the mansion where the humiliation had unfolded. Social media was ruthless. Hashtags carrying my sister-in-law's name trended for all the wrong reasons. At the office, her downfall was immediate. She walked in the next day, head down, only to be met by security guards who escorted her straight back out. Her boss, my silent ally, had made the decision without hesitation. Fraud, misconduct, and public humiliation were reasons enough, but the viral storm sealed her fate. She was out, not with a whisper, but with a spectacular collapse. My brother fared no better. The financial records I'd released were more than embarrassing. They were criminal. Within a week, subpoenas arrived at his door. His vacation photos, once flaunted proudly on social media, became evidence of fraud. His friends vanished, his colleagues distanced themselves. And soon he was sitting across from investigators who didn't care about his excuses. And my parents, those who once stood tall in the community, admired for their supposed sacrifices, now found themselves ostracized. Neighbors whispered when they passed, friends stopped answering their calls, and invitations dried up. The very people they had boasted to now crossed the street to avoid them. Their names had become synonymous with deceit. Their reputation burned to ashes. But the most unexpected blow came during a live broadcast where analysts discussed the scandal. A former employee of my sister-in-law stood up, trembling but resolute, and shared her story. She spoke of stolen credit, verbal abuse, and financial manipulation. Her testimony cracked open a dam. One after another, others stepped forward, colleagues, assistants, people she had trampled on for years. The narrative shifted. She wasn't just cruel to me. She was cruel to everyone. The dominoes fell, each louder than the last. Late that night, as I sat in my study, my laptop chimed with a new email. The subject line sent a chill down my spine. "I know what they did to you. Let me help expose them." My finger hovered over the mouse, my heart pounding. Someone else knew. Someone else had proof. The war I thought was nearly over had only just begun. For the first time in years, I didn't feel cornered. I felt the weight shift, the ground tilting in my favor. The next day, I didn't rush into battle. I let the dust settle, let the silence speak louder than I ever could. I took a long walk through the garden of my mansion, the morning air sharp in my lungs. For once, I could breathe without the weight of their demands pressing against my chest. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, no tray in my hands, no mocking eyes on me. Just the steady rhythm of my breath, the soft hum of the city outside, and the quiet crackle of the fireplace. Tears slid down my cheeks, not of pain, but of release. I wasn't crying because I was broken. I was crying because, for the first time, I was free. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to scream for revenge. Justice wasn't a storm I created. It was a mirror I held up to their faces until the truth swallowed them whole. Watching them unravel wasn't about satisfaction, it was about liberation. And yet, as the days passed, I realized this story wasn't just mine. One evening, I opened my phone to see message after message from strangers. Some wrote about greedy siblings, others about manipulative parents or partners who drained them dry. Each message carried the same thread. I thought I was alone. You've given me hope. A movement began without me intending it. Voices rose, stories spread, and people found courage in what I had done. I wasn't the only one who had suffered, and I wouldn't be the last. The weight on my chest lifted as I realized my pain had carved a path for others. What once chained me was now a torch in my hand. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced in their own home. One night, as I stood by the window, overlooking the city, I whispered to my reflection, "This is just the beginning." And I meant every word. The silence after the storm was the sweetest sound I had ever known. My phone, once a constant weight buzzing with demands, was finally quiet. No more midnight calls, no more guilt-laden messages. For the first time in my adult life, I controlled the boundaries of my world. I started with finances. I closed every joint account, cut off every loan pipeline, and locked my wealth behind walls they couldn't climb. My lawyer helped me draw contracts that made it impossible for my family to lay claim to anything I owned. My accounts, my company, my home, they were mine, guarded by the law as fiercely as by my own resolve. Then came the emotional boundaries. I blocked numbers, deleted chats, and stopped answering the knocks that came at my gate. I told myself it wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Love, I realized, wasn't supposed to drain me until I was hollow. It was supposed to protect, to nourish. What I had given them wasn't love, it was submission, and submission had ended, but they didn't give up easily. My parents appeared at my door one Sunday afternoon, faces lined with tears, hands trembling with rehearsed apologies. My father's voice cracked as he pleaded, "We're still your family, Emily. Don't shut us out. We need you." My mother's sobs filled the air like old ghosts. For a long moment, I stood in the doorway, watching the people who had once held absolute power over me. My heart ached, not because I believed them, but because part of me still wished they had been different. They begged for forgiveness, for another chance. I let the silence stretch before I answered, my voice calm but final. Family isn't blood, family is trust, and you broke mine beyond repair. Their faces crumpled, but I didn't move. Slowly, I pushed the door closed. The sound of it slamming shut echoed through the hall like a gavel. On the other side, their voices rose in desperation, but I walked away, each step lighter than the last, Behind me, the house stood still, absorbing their absence like it had waited years for this moment. For a second, I wondered if regret would creep in. But as I leaned against the cool wall of my home, breathing deeply, I realized something incredible. I wasn't mourning the loss of my family. I was celebrating the return of myself. With freedom came responsibility. My story had spilled far beyond my mansion walls. It had sparked something larger. Messages from strangers still flooded my inbox. Women and men trapped in toxic households, children afraid to speak out, partners suffocating under emotional blackmail. They saw themselves in me, and they needed more than my silence. They needed a hand reaching back. That's when the idea came. I would build a foundation, not for profit, not for show, but as a lifeline. A place where victims of toxic families could find lawyers, therapists, financial advisors, and most importantly, hope. I poured my energy, my money, and my scars into its creation. And when the doors opened, the stories that poured in confirmed what I had always suspected. I was never truly alone. None of us were. The day the foundation launched, I received an invitation from the very man who had first exposed me at the party. My sister-in-law's former boss, now my ally. Over dinner, he leaned forward and said, "Emily, this movement is bigger than the city, bigger than this country. Let me take your foundation global. Let's change lives everywhere." For once, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Months later, I stood on a stage in a foreign country, the lights warm on my face, the audience filled with people who had traveled miles just to hear one message: that survival was possible, that liberation was real. Cameras flashed, applause thundered, and in that moment, I knew I had rewritten not only my future, but also the futures of countless others. Yet the true victory wasn't on stages or in headlines. It was in the quiet moments. Late at night, I would pour a glass of wine and sit by the window of my mansion, the same house where I had once been humiliated. Now, no voices mocked me, no shadows demanded pieces of me. The air was still, and I was free. I lifted the glass, watching the reflection of my smile in its surface. No tears, no weight, just peace. The laughter of strangers online had turned to admiration. The chains of family had broken into dust. I whispered into the stillness, as if speaking to the woman I once was, trembling in the dark under the weight of their demands. You survived, and now you thrive. The city lights shimmered beyond my window. My story had started with humiliation, wound through betrayal, sharpened into strategy, and erupted into justice. And now it ended where it always should have, here in quiet triumph, with nothing but possibility ahead. Because this wasn't just the end, it was the beginning of everything.